I still remember the moment I pressed confirm on the airline booking website, my hands trembling as I watched the confirmation email appear in my inbox. 2 tickets to Barcelona, one for me, Charlotte Davis, age 34, and one for my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. The blue glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face in the dim kitchen, where I sat surrounded by the ghosts of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. If you've ever been lied to by someone you trusted completely, comment below where you're watching from. Like and subscribe to hear how I discovered my dead husband was actually alive. 4 years. For long years since my husband Daniel Davis had vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a routine business trip to Seattle. No body, no closure, just a missing persons report that eventually became a presumption of death certificate. I could still feel the weight of that document in my hands, the way the paper seemed to burn my fingers as I held my daughter close, trying to explain why Daddy wasn't coming home. Tonight, as I booked this trip to Spain, I wasn't just purchasing a vacation. I was buying myself permission to breathe again, to show Emma that life could hold joy even after devastating loss. The trip represented everything I'd been too afraid to hope for: healing, new memories, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to smile without feeling guilty about it. Emma had been asking about her father more frequently lately. "Mommy, do you think Daddy can see the pictures I draw? Or, when I grow up, will I remember his voice?" Each question was like a small knife twisting in my chest, reminding me that while I had learned to function without Daniel, my daughter was still trying to understand why half of her world had simply disappeared. The truth was, I hadn't processed any of it. I had become a master of compartmentalization, shoving my grief into a locked box and focusing entirely on survival. Work at the insurance company, Emma's school schedule, soccer practice, grocery shopping, bedtime stories. I had built a routine so tight there was no room for the crushing weight of loss to seep in. But lately that box had been rattling, and I knew it was time to open it, preferably somewhere far from the memories that haunted every corner of our house in Portland. Barcelona had been Daniel's dream destination. He used to talk about the Sagrada Familia, the beaches, the tapas bars where we would sit and watch the sunset. "Someday, Charlotte," he would say, "we'll walk down Los Ramblas with Emma, and she'll practice her Spanish with the street vendors." That someday never came, of course, but maybe it was time to create our own version of it. When I told Emma about the trip, her reaction was everything I had hoped for. Her green eyes, so much like Daniel's, went wide with excitement. "Really, Mommy? We're going on an airplane? To Spain?" She threw her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe, and for the first time in months, I felt something that resembled happiness blooming in my chest. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those serious eyes that seemed too old for her 7-year-old face. "Mommy, do you think this trip will make you happy again?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Had I been that transparent? Had my careful facade of strength been fooling no one but myself? "I hope so, sweetheart," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "I really hope so." There was a time when my life felt like a fairy tale. Daniel Davis wasn't just handsome, though with his dark hair, warm brown eyes, and that crooked smile that made my stomach flutter even after 5 years of marriage, he certainly was that. He had this incredible ability to make everyone around him feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. I met him when I was 28, working as a claims adjuster at Pacific Northwest Insurance. He walked into my office one afternoon, needing to file a claim for water damage to his apartment, and somehow turned what should have been a mundane business transaction into the most engaging conversation I'd had in months. "You know," he said, leaning back in the chair across from my desk, "most people would be devastated about their ceiling caving in, but I'm starting to think it was the best thing that ever happened to me." When I asked why, he grinned and said, "Because it led me to you." It was cheesy, the kind of line that should have made me roll my eyes, but something about the way he said it, genuine, without a trace of artifice, made my heart skip. We talked for 2 hours that day, long after his claim had been processed. About books, travel dreams, the way the light looked different in Portland during winter versus summer. By the time he left, I was completely smitten, and I could tell he felt the same way. We married 8 months later in a small ceremony at Powell Butte Nature Preserve, surrounded by Douglas firs and the people we loved most. Daniel worked in tech sales for a rapidly growing startup, and I had just been promoted to senior claims investigator. We felt unstoppable, like we were building something beautiful and permanent together. When Emma came along 2 years later, I thought Daniel would settle into domesticity the way I had. I imagined quiet evenings with family dinners, weekend trips to the coast, bedtime stories read in his warm, soothing voice. And for a while, that's exactly what we had. Daniel was a devoted father those first few years, always eager to change diapers, to walk the floors with Emma when she was colicky, to sing her to sleep with his slightly off-key renditions of classic rock ballads. But as Emma grew older and Daniel's company began expanding nationally, everything changed. The man who used to rush home for dinner started staying late for critical client calls. Weekend family time was replaced by emergency strategy sessions and last-minute business trips. Cities I'd never heard of became familiar names on his itinerary: Boise, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Denver. I tried to be understanding at first. This was his career after all, and the money was good, better than good. We were able to buy a house in a neighborhood with excellent schools, to start a college fund for Emma, to talk seriously about that trip to Barcelona we'd been dreaming about. But as the months wore on, I began to feel like I was raising Emma alone while married to a ghost who occasionally appeared in our kitchen at midnight, exhausted and distracted. "Danny, you missed her first soccer game," I said one evening, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice as he scrolled through emails on his phone while I cleaned up dinner dishes. Emma had been asleep for an hour, and he hadn't even asked about her day. I know, he said, not looking up from the screen. "Tell her I'm sorry. I'll make it to the next one, I promise." But he didn't make it to the next one or the one after that. The promises became a steady refrain, background music to a marriage that was slowly coming apart at the seams. I began to feel like a single mother who happened to share a mortgage with a stranger. The last real conversation we had was on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Emma was at a sleepover, and I had planned to cook Daniel's favorite meal, salmon with that lemon herb sauce he loved, and talk to him about how disconnected we'd become. I wanted to tell him that I missed him, that Emma missed him, that we needed him to be present, not just physically there. He came home at almost 11 o'clock, too exhausted to eat, mumbling something about a conference call with clients in Asia. When I tried to bring up my concerns, he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Charlotte, I'm doing this for us. You have to understand, this opportunity won't last forever. I need to establish myself now while the company is growing. Once we're more stable, once I prove myself indispensable, things will calm down." "When?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. "When will things calm down?" "Because Emma is growing up without her father, and I'm going crazy trying to hold this family together by myself." He pulled me into his arms then, and for a moment I felt like I had my husband back. "Soon," he whispered into my hair. "I promise, Charlotte. Soon everything will be different." 3 days later, he left for Seattle. It was supposed to be a quick trip, 2 days, 3 at most. A client presentation that could potentially bring in enough revenue to change the trajectory of his career. "This could be it," he said, kissing me goodbye at the door while Emma clung to his leg. "This could be the deal that sets us up for life." I watched him drive away, his rental car disappearing around the corner, and felt an inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the Oregon weather. I told myself it was just anxiety about another business trip, another few days of single parenting. I had no way of knowing that it was the last time I would ever see my husband. The first day passed normally. Daniel texted from the airport, then again when he landed in Seattle. His usual updates: "Made it safely. Wish me luck with the presentation tomorrow. Love you both." The second day, silence. I told myself he was probably in back-to-back meetings, too busy to check his phone. The presentation was important. He needed to focus. By the third day, when his phone went straight to voicemail and his company said they hadn't heard from him either, I knew something was wrong. The police were kind but not particularly helpful. Adults disappear all the time, they told me. Usually, they turn up within a few days with a reasonable explanation. Daniel never turned up. 4 years later, sitting in my kitchen booking flights to Barcelona, I could still feel the weight of those endless searching days. The calls to hospitals, the missing persons reports, the private investigator who took our savings and produced nothing but theories and dead ends. Eventually, the state declared him legally dead, and I was left to rebuild a life I had never imagined living. But I had survived, and so had Emma. We had created our own version of family, our own traditions and rhythms. And now, finally, I was ready to take her to see the world Daniel had always promised to show her, not because he had wanted it, but because we deserved it. The morning of our departure, Emma bounced around our house like a pinball, her excitement infectious despite my own nervous energy. She had packed and repacked her small rolling suitcase 3 times, making sure she had her favorite stuffed elephant, the sketchpad she planned to fill with drawings of Spanish architecture, and the Spanish phrase book we'd been practicing with for weeks. Hola, me llamo Emma, she practiced in the car on the way to the airport, her pronunciation careful and deliberate. ¿Cómo está usted? Very good, sweetheart, I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Your accent is getting better every day. Portland International Airport was its usual chaotic symphony of rolling luggage, overhead announcements, and travelers clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Emma gripped my hand tightly as we navigated through security and found our gate, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling terminal around us. Look, Mommy, she whispered, pointing to the departure board. Our flight really is there. Barcelona. We're really going. The weight of that statement hit me harder than I expected. We were really going. After 4 years of careful routines and cautious planning, we were actually doing something spontaneous and brave. I squeezed Emma's hand and smiled. Yes, baby. We're really going. Our flight was called for boarding, and we made our way down the jet bridge, Emma practically vibrating with excitement beside me. We found our seats, window and middle in row 23, and I helped her get settled, stowing her backpack in the overhead compartment and making sure she had her coloring books and tablet easily accessible. As passengers continued to board, I found myself people-watching, a habit I'd developed over the years. There was a young couple arguing quietly about something, an elderly man traveling alone with a worn paperback novel, a businesswoman already on her laptop despite not having taken off yet. Normal people living normal lives just like us. And then I saw him. He was walking down the aisle slowly, checking seat numbers, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and aviator sunglasses despite being inside the plane. Something about his profile, the way he held his shoulders, the familiar rhythm of his stride, made my stomach drop to my feet. It couldn't be. It absolutely could not be. But as he passed our row and continued toward the back of the plane, I caught a glimpse of something that made my breath catch in my throat. A small scar on the back of his left hand, just below his pinky finger. A scar I knew intimately because I had kissed it 100 times, had traced it with my fingertip during lazy Sunday mornings when the world felt safe and predictable. Daniel had gotten that scar when Emma was 2, trying to fix a broken picture frame and slicing his hand on the glass. I had bandaged it myself, fussing over him while he insisted it was just a scratch. Emma tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, are you okay? You look funny. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on her concerned face instead of the impossible man who had just walked past us. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just excited about our trip. But I wasn't fine. I was the opposite of fine. Because unless I was losing my mind, which was entirely possible, my dead husband was sitting somewhere behind us on this plane, very much alive and apparently traveling under a different name. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, but I couldn't focus on a word they were saying. My mind was racing, trying to process what I thought I had seen. It had to be a mistake. Grief could play terrible tricks on the mind. I had read about that in the support group literature I'd never quite brought myself to attend. People saw their lost loved ones everywhere, in crowds, in cars, in grocery stores. It was a normal part of the healing process, or so the pamphlets claimed. But that scar. That specific, unmistakable scar. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I found myself twisting in my seat, trying to catch another glimpse of the man without being obvious about it. Emma was pressed against the window, watching the ground crew and fuel trucks with fascination, completely unaware that her mother was having what felt like a complete psychological breakdown 3 rows away. "Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for takeoff." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, and I forced myself to face forward, to buckle my seatbelt, to pretend that my world hadn't just tilted off its axis at 30,000 feet. The plane lifted off, Portland shrinking below us as we climbed into the clouds, and I closed my eyes, trying to talk myself back to sanity. It wasn't Daniel. It couldn't be Daniel. Daniel was dead, had been dead for 4 years, and I was finally starting to heal from that loss. This trip was supposed to be about moving forward, not about chasing ghosts that existed only in my traumatized imagination. But as the flight leveled off and the seatbelt sign dinged off, I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I proved to myself that I was wrong. That the man sitting somewhere behind us was just a stranger who happened to share a few physical characteristics with my dead husband. I waited until Emma was absorbed in her coloring book, then stood up casually, as if I were just stretching my legs. I walked slowly toward the back of the plane, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned the seats for the baseball cap and sunglasses. I found him in row 34, aisle seat, apparently asleep with his head tilted back and his cap pulled down over his face. For a moment, I just stood there in the aisle, studying what I could see of his features. The jawline looked right, and the hands resting on the armrests could have been Daniel's hands. But it was impossible to be certain without seeing his eyes, and I couldn't exactly wake up a stranger to demand he prove he wasn't my supposedly dead husband. I was about to turn around and return to my seat when he shifted slightly, and his cap slipped just enough to reveal more of his face. My knees went weak, and I had to grab the nearest seat back to keep from falling. It was him. It was definitely, unmistakably him. Daniel Davis, my husband, the father of my child, the man I had grieved for 4 years, was sitting on this plane, alive and breathing and apparently traveling to Barcelona just like we were. I stumbled back to my seat on unsteady legs, my mind reeling with questions that seemed impossible to answer. Emma looked up from her coloring book as I sat down, her expression curious. "Did you see something cool, Mommy?" I managed a shaky smile. "Just stretching my legs, baby. How's your picture coming?" She held up her coloring book, showing me a carefully colored scene of a castle. "I'm practicing for when we see real castles in Spain." I nodded and made appropriate admiring noises, but my thoughts were spinning in circles. If Daniel was alive, where had he been for 4 years? Why had he let us believe he was dead? Why was he on this plane, and was it just a coincidence that we were on the same flight to the same destination? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them, each one more painful than the last. Had he left us intentionally? Was he living some secret life while I struggled to rebuild ours? Did he know Emma and I were on this plane? As the hours passed and the flight continued across the Atlantic, I found myself stealing glances toward the back of the plane, hoping for another glimpse that might prove I was wrong. But every time I saw him, the certainty only grew stronger. That was my husband, alive and well and apparently perfectly fine with letting his wife and daughter believe he was dead. By the time the captain announced our descent into Barcelona, I had made a decision. I was going to follow him. I was going to find out where he was staying, what he was doing, and why he had put us through 4 years of unnecessary hell. Emma deserved answers, and so did I. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and passengers began gathering their belongings and filing toward the exit. I waited, watching as Daniel stood up and retrieved a small carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. He moved with the same confident stride I remembered, and for a moment, I was transported back to happier times when that walk meant he was coming home to us at the end of a long day. But those days were gone, shattered by his disappearance, and 4 years of grief I was only now beginning to understand might have been completely unnecessary. Barcelona greeted us with warm sunshine and the scent of sea air mixed with the urban aroma of a busy international city. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement as we made our way through the airport, chattering in a mixture of English and her carefully practiced Spanish phrases. Under normal circumstances, I would have been caught up in her joy, but my attention was focused entirely on the man walking about 20 feet ahead of us through the terminal. Daniel moved through the crowds with purpose, clearly familiar with the airport layout. He didn't hesitate at the directional signs or pause to check his phone for navigation. He knew exactly where he was going. That detail alone made my stomach churn. How many times had he been here? How long had this secret life been going on? "Mommy, look." Emma tugged on my sleeve, pointing to a colorful mosaic on the airport wall. "It's just like the pictures in our guidebook." I forced myself to focus on her, to smile and respond appropriately. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. We're going to see so much amazing art while we're here." But even as I spoke to Emma, I kept one eye on Daniel's retreating figure. He was heading toward the taxi queue, and I knew I had a decision to make quickly. Our original plan had been to take the metro to our hotel, but if I wanted to find out where he was going, I needed to follow him. "Change of plans, baby," I said, steering Emma toward the taxi line. "Let's take a taxi to the hotel. It'll be more comfortable after such a long flight." Emma didn't object. At 7, any mode of transportation was an adventure. We joined the queue, several people behind Daniel, close enough to observe but far enough away to avoid being noticed. He was traveling alone, I realized, no companion or family in sight. Part of me had been bracing for the possibility of seeing him with another woman, another family, but he appeared to be by himself. When his turn came, I watched him slide into a yellow taxi and observed as he handed the driver what looked like a written address. The taxi pulled away, and I quickly memorized the license plate number, though I wasn't sure what good it would do me. Our turn came, and I helped Emma into the back seat of our own taxi, my mind racing with possibilities. The driver, a cheerful man in his 50s, asked in accented English where we were headed. "Hotel Casa Bonita, please," I said, giving him the name of our accommodation. "But first, could you follow that yellow taxi ahead? The one with license plate." I rattled off the numbers I'd memorized. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, eyebrows raised. "You want to follow someone?" "It's complicated," I said. "Family matter." He shrugged and pulled into traffic behind Daniel's taxi. Emma was pressed against the window, taking in the sights of Barcelona as we drove through the city. Palm trees lined the boulevards, and the architecture was a beautiful mixture of Gothic, modernist, and contemporary styles. Under different circumstances, I would have been enchanted by our first glimpse of the city Daniel had always dreamed of visiting. Instead, I was focused on the taxi ahead of us, watching as it navigated through Barcelona's busy streets. We drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the airport area and entering what appeared to be a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and elegant apartment buildings. The taxi ahead finally stopped in front of a small boutique hotel called Hotel Marisol. I watched as Daniel got out, paid the driver, and disappeared through the hotel's front entrance with his single carry-on bag. "Here?" our driver asked, pulling up across the street. "No, continue to our hotel, please," I said. But I memorized the address and the name of the hotel.
Hotel Marisol on Carrer de Provença.
At least now I knew where to find him when I was ready for answers. Our own hotel was lovely, a family-run establishment in the Gothic Quarter with thick stone walls and a charming courtyard. Emma was delighted with our room, which had a small balcony overlooking a narrow medieval street. She immediately claimed the chair by the window and began sketching the scene below while I unpacked our things and tried to process everything that had happened. My husband was alive. He was here in Barcelona, staying at a hotel less than 2 miles from ours. After 4 years of believing him dead, of rebuilding our lives around his absence, he was breathing the same air I was breathing, walking the same ancient streets I would be walking with our daughter. The questions that had been circling in my mind since the airplane became more urgent and specific. Was this trip a coincidence, or had he somehow known we would be here? If he was alive, why hadn't he contacted us? Where had he been for 4 years, and what was he doing in Barcelona? Emma's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "Mommy, can we go see the Sagrada Familia today? I want to draw it before it gets dark." I looked at her eager face, so full of trust and excitement, and felt a wave of protective fury wash over me. This trip was supposed to be about her, about giving her joy and new experiences. Daniel's sudden reappearance, or rather my discovery of his continued existence, couldn't be allowed to overshadow that. "Of course we can," I said, pushing thoughts of Daniel aside for the moment. "Let's get some lunch first and then we'll go explore." We spent the afternoon like proper tourists, wandering through Park Güell, marveling at Gaudi's whimsical architecture, and eating gelato while Emma practiced her Spanish with street vendors. She was fearless in her attempts to communicate, gesturing wildly when words failed her and beaming with pride when she successfully ordered ice cream without any help from me. For a few hours, I almost managed to forget about Daniel entirely. Emma's joy was infectious, and Barcelona itself was magical in a way that made it easy to lose yourself in the moment. The city pulsed with life and color, from the street musicians on Las Ramblas to the elaborate Gothic facades of the Cathedral district. But as evening approached and we returned to our hotel for dinner, the reality of the situation came crashing back. Daniel was here, somewhere in this city, and I had to decide what to do about it. Emma fell asleep easily that night, exhausted from travel and excitement. I tucked her in carefully, then stepped out onto our small balcony with my phone and a glass of wine from the mini-bar. The narrow street below was quiet now, lit by old-fashioned street lamps that cast dancing shadows on the ancient stones. I found myself Googling Hotel Marisol, trying to learn more about where Daniel was staying. It was a small, upscale establishment that advertised itself as a retreat for discerning travelers seeking privacy and tranquility. The kind of place someone might choose if they wanted to avoid being found. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had brought Emma to Barcelona to help us both move forward from Daniel's death, and instead I had discovered that there was no death to move on from. He was alive, he was here, and everything I thought I knew about the last 4 years of our lives was apparently a lie. I sat on the balcony for a long time that night, listening to the distant sounds of the city and trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to march over to Hotel Marisol immediately and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had learned to be cautious and protective over the past 4 years, warned me to be careful. If Daniel had gone to such lengths to disappear, there might be a reason. What if he was in some kind of trouble? What if approaching him put Emma and me in danger? What if he had built a new life and my sudden appearance would destroy it? But then I thought about Emma's questions about her father, about the nights she had cried because she missed him, about the way she still sometimes set an extra place at the table out of habit. I thought about the life insurance money I had never claimed because his body was never found, about the job I had taken to support us, about the years of grief counseling and single motherhood that might have been completely unnecessary. By the time I finally went to bed, I had made my decision. Tomorrow I would go to Hotel Marisol. I would find Daniel and get the answers that Emma and I deserved. Whatever the truth was, whatever reasons he had for his disappearance, I needed to know. Our life had been built on the foundation of his death. It was time to find out what it might look like built on the truth of his life instead. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of Mediterranean sunshine that should have filled me with energy and optimism. Instead, I woke with a knot of anxiety in my stomach that coffee and pastry couldn't touch. Emma, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my mind, was already planning our day over breakfast in the hotel's charming courtyard. "Can we see the cathedral today, Mommy? And maybe take the funicular up to Montjuic? The guidebook says the views are amazing." I nodded and made appropriate responses, but my thoughts were entirely focused on Hotel Marisol and the conversation I needed to have with my supposedly dead husband. I had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing what I would say to him, how I would approach him, what questions I would ask first. After breakfast, I arranged for Emma to spend a few hours at the hotel's children's activity program, a small group of international kids exploring Barcelona's history through art projects and games. She was thrilled to make new friends and practice her Spanish, and it gave me the perfect opportunity to slip away without having to explain where I was going. The walk to Hotel Marisol took me through some of Barcelona's most beautiful neighborhoods, past elegant modernist buildings and tree-lined boulevards that Daniel would have loved. The irony was bitter. We should have been exploring this city together, as the family we had planned to be. Instead, I was walking alone to confront the man who had let us grieve him for 4 years. Hotel Marisol was exactly as advertised, small, elegant, and discreet. The kind of place that valued privacy above all else. I stood across the street for several minutes, gathering my courage and trying to figure out how to approach this. I couldn't exactly walk up to the front desk and ask for Daniel Davis. He was obviously using a different name. As I stood there, trying to formulate a plan, the problem solved itself. Daniel emerged from the hotel's front entrance, dressed casually in khakis and a blue button-down shirt that I recognized because I had bought it for him 3 Christmases ago. He looked older than I remembered, with more gray in his hair and new lines around his eyes, but he was unmistakably the man I had married, the man I had mourned. He turned left and began walking down the street with the confident stride of someone familiar with the neighborhood. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding so hard I was sure other pedestrians could hear it. Where was he going? What was his routine here? How long had he been living this secret life? Daniel walked for about 10 minutes before stopping at a small cafe with outdoor seating. He chose a table in the shade of a large umbrella and ordered coffee from a waiter who clearly knew him. They exchanged pleasantries in what sounded like fluent Spanish. How long had he been here? Long enough to learn the language, apparently. I found a spot at a cafe across the street where I could observe him without being seen. He seemed relaxed, at ease, like a man on vacation rather than someone hiding from his past. He pulled out a smartphone and spent several minutes scrolling through what looked like emails or messages, occasionally typing responses. For a moment, watching him in this normal, everyday scene, I almost convinced myself that I was mistaken. This couldn't be Daniel. This was just a man who resembled my husband, who happened to have a similar scar, who happened to be in Barcelona at the same time we were. The alternative, that Daniel had been alive all this time while Emma and I struggled with his loss, was too painful to accept. But then he laughed at something on his phone, and the sound carried across the street to where I sat. It was Daniel's laugh, unmistakably. The same laugh that used to fill our kitchen during Saturday morning pancake sessions, the same laugh that Emma had inherited and that I hadn't heard enough of in the past 4 years. I paid for my untouched coffee and crossed the street before I could lose my nerve. My legs felt unsteady as I approached his table, and I wondered what I looked like to him. Older, certainly, probably tired in ways that had nothing to do with jet lag. Daniel. His head snapped up at the sound of my voice, and the expression that crossed his face was one I had never seen before. Shock, fear, and something that might have been guilt all flashed across his features in rapid succession. His phone clattered to the table as his hands went slack. Charlotte. My name came out as barely a whisper. How are you, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same question, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the way my heart was racing. Considering you're supposed to be dead. He glanced around nervously as if checking to see who might be listening. The cafe was fairly empty, just a few other tables occupied by tourists and locals enjoying their morning coffee. Please, he said quietly. Sit down. We need to talk. I remained standing, my hands clenched at my sides. Do we? Because I've been waiting to talk to you for 4 years, Daniel. 4 years of believing you were dead, of explaining to our daughter why her father was never coming home. So forgive me if I don't feel like making this convenient for you. Charlotte, please. His voice was pleading now. I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. I can explain everything, but not here. Not like this. Then where? I demanded. When? Because Emma and I deserve answers, and we deserve them now. At the mention of Emma's name, something shifted in his expression. Pain, longing, regret, emotions that looked genuine even if I wasn't sure I could trust them. How is she? He asked softly. How is our daughter? The question hit me like a physical blow. She's 7 years old, Daniel. She's beautiful and smart and funny, and she misses her father every single day. She draws pictures of you sometimes, trying to remember what you looked like. She asks me if you can see her from heaven, if you're proud of her when she does well in school. How do you think she is?" He flinched as if I had slapped him. "I never wanted. I didn't mean for it to happen this way." "What way did you mean for it to happen?" I asked. "When you decided to disappear and let us believe you were dead?" "I didn't decide anything," he said quickly. "It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I was trying to protect you both." "Protect us from what?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a kind of desperate resignation. "From me. From the mess I had made of everything. From the people who were looking for me." "What people? What mess?" "Daniel, you're not making any sense." He sighed heavily. "Can we please go somewhere more private? I'll tell you everything, I promise. But not here where anyone could overhear." I wanted to say no, to demand answers right there in the middle of the cafe where he couldn't disappear again. But I also knew that Emma would be expecting me back soon, and this conversation was going to take time. More time than a public confrontation would allow. "Hotel Marisol," I said finally. "Your room. 1 hour." He nodded, relief evident on his face. "Room 314. Charlotte, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I am glad you're here. I've missed you both more than you could possibly know." I turned and walked away without responding, not trusting myself to speak. As I made my way back to my hotel, my mind was spinning with fragments of what he had said. Protect us from what? What people were looking for him? And if he had missed us so much, why hadn't he found a way to contact us in 4 years? By the time I reached Hotel Casa Bonita, I had worked myself into a state of barely controlled fury. Emma was waiting for me in the lobby, her face glowing with excitement from her morning activities. "Mommy, I made a friend named Sophia from Italy, and we built a model of the Sagrada Familia out of clay. Look." She thrust a small, lopsided sculpture toward me, beaming with pride. I forced myself to focus on her joy, to push aside the chaos of emotions swirling in my chest. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're so talented. Can we go see the real one now? Sophia says her family is going this afternoon too." "Actually, honey, I need to take care of something first. Why don't you stay here with the activity group for another hour or two? They're planning to do some Spanish storytelling, and I think you'd love it." Emma's face fell slightly. "Are you okay, Mommy? You look sad." I knelt down to her level, smoothing her dark hair. "I'm fine, baby. Just taking care of some grown-up business. I'll be back soon, and then we'll spend the whole rest of the day together, okay?" She nodded, though I could see the concern in her green eyes, Daniel's eyes. "Promise?" "Promise." An hour later, I stood outside room 314 at Hotel Marisol, my hand raised to knock. Everything in me wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend this morning had never happened, to go back to the life Emma and I had built without him. But I needed answers, and more importantly, Emma deserved the truth about her father, whatever that truth might be. I knocked. Daniel opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting right beside it. He had changed into a different shirt and looked like he had attempted to make himself more presentable, though nothing could hide the haunted expression in his eyes. "Charlotte, thank you for coming." I stepped into the room without invitation. It was small but elegant, with a view of the Mediterranean in the distance. A laptop was open on the desk, and I noticed several notebooks scattered around, covered in handwriting I recognized as his. "You said you could explain everything," I said, remaining standing near the door. "So explain." He gestured to a chair, but I shook my head. This wasn't a social visit. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when he was nervous or stressed. 4 years ago, when I went to Seattle, it wasn't just for a client presentation. I had gotten involved in something I shouldn't have. Something illegal. My stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "Money laundering," he said quietly. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It started small. A client asked me to move some funds around, said it was for tax purposes. The commissions were huge, Charlotte. bigger than anything I had ever seen. I thought it was just wealthy people trying to minimize their tax burden. But it wasn't. No, it was drug money. Millions of dollars that needed to be cleaned through legitimate business channels. By the time I realized what I was really doing, I was in too deep. They had documentation of everything I had done, evidence that would have sent me to prison for decades. I felt the blood drain from my face. Prison? I tried to get out, to walk away, but they made it clear that wasn't an option. They owned me. And worse, they started making threats about you and Emma. Said they knew where you worked, where Emma went to school. Said that if I ever tried to leave or go to the authorities, they would make sure you both paid the price. The room felt like it was spinning around me. So you just disappeared? I panicked, he said, his voice breaking slightly. The presentation in Seattle was supposed to be my last job for them. I was going to tell them I was done, that I couldn't do it anymore. But when I got there, they told me about a federal investigation that was closing in. They said I had maybe days before everything came crashing down. So you ran? I ran, he confirmed. I ditched my phone, my wallet, my rental car. I had some cash they had paid me, and I used it to disappear. I thought if everyone believed I was dead, you and Emma would be safe. The investigation would focus on finding me, not investigating my family. I sank into the chair I had refused earlier, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The snowmobile accident. The river. I staged it. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I know how terrible that sounds, but I couldn't think of any other way to protect you both. I thought if I just disappeared for a while, if I could stay hidden until the investigation was over. For years, Daniel. 4 years. I know. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly together. It was supposed to be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year at most. But the investigation kept expanding, and I realized that even if they closed the case, the people I had been working with would still be looking for me. I couldn't come back without putting you in danger. So what changed? Why are you here now, living openly in Barcelona? They're all dead or in prison, he said simply. The entire organization was taken down 18 months ago. I've been monitoring the news, watching for any sign that it was safe to surface again. 18 months, I repeated, the number hitting me like a slap. You could have come home 18 months ago and you didn't. I wanted to, he said quickly. God, Charlotte, you have no idea how much I wanted to. But how could I? How could I just show up on your doorstep after letting you believe I was dead? How could I explain to Emma why her father had abandoned her? So instead you decided to stay dead forever? I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I hired a private investigator to check on you both, to make sure you were okay. When I learned that you were doing well, that Emma was thriving, that you had built a good life without me, I thought maybe it was better to leave things as they were. The fury I had been holding in check finally exploded. Better for who, Daniel? Better for you? Because it certainly wasn't better for your daughter, who cries herself to sleep sometimes because she misses her daddy. It wasn't better for me, trying to hold our family together while grieving the man I loved. I know, he said, tears running down his face now. I know I made the wrong choice. I've regretted it every single day for 4 years. Then why didn't you come home? Because I'm a coward, he said simply. Because I was terrified that you would hate me for what I had done, that Emma wouldn't even remember me, that I had destroyed any chance of having my family back. I stared at him, this man I had loved so completely, who had been living with the guilt of his choices while Emma and I lived with the grief of his loss. What are you doing in Barcelona? I've been living here for 2 years. I have a small apartment, a job teaching English. I chose Barcelona because... He paused, looking almost embarrassed. Because we used to talk about coming here together. It felt like the closest I could get to the life we had planned. And you just happened to be on our flight? No, he said quietly. That wasn't a coincidence. I've been monitoring your social media accounts. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to know how you were doing. When I saw that you had booked a trip to Barcelona, I changed my own flight to be on the same plane. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. You followed us here. I had to see you, he said desperately. I had to see Emma. I thought maybe if I could just see that you were both truly okay, I could finally let go. Let go of what? Of the hope that someday I might find a way to explain, to make amends, to have some small part in your lives again. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The Mediterranean sparkled in the distance, beautiful and serene, completely at odds with the storm raging inside me. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? Do you understand what it means to tell a 3-year-old that her daddy is never coming home? To watch her grow up wondering if she did something wrong, if that's why you left. I never wanted. I don't care what you wanted, I interrupted. I care about what you did. You made a choice, Daniel. You chose to let us grieve you rather than trust us with the truth. You chose to let Emma grow up without her father rather than fight for your family. I was trying to protect you. No, I said, turning to face him. You were protecting yourself. From consequences, from difficult conversations, from having to face what you had done. Don't dress it up as some noble sacrifice, because it wasn't. He flinched as if I had struck him, but he didn't argue. You're right. You're absolutely right. What do you want from me now, Daniel? What do you want from us? I want to see her, he said quietly. I want to see Emma. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Please, Charlotte. Let me see my daughter. I left Daniel's hotel room without giving him an answer, my mind reeling with everything he had told me. Money laundering. Federal investigations. Death threats. It was like something out of a movie, not the life of the man I had married, the father of my child. The walk back to my hotel gave me time to process, to try to separate my anger at Daniel from what might be best for Emma. She had spent 4 years believing her father was dead. How could I possibly explain to a 7-year-old that he had been alive all this time but had chosen to stay away? But even as I wrestled with the impossibility of the situation, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Daniel's eyes when he talked about Emma. The pain, the longing, the desperate love of a father who had been separated from his child. Whatever else he had done, whatever lies he had told, that emotion had been real. Emma was waiting for me in the hotel lobby, practically bouncing with excitement. Mommy? Sophia's family invited us to have lunch with them. Can we? Please? I looked at her eager face, so full of trust and joy, and felt my heart break a little more. How was I supposed to tell her that her dead father was actually alive and staying 2 miles away? How was I supposed to explain that everything we had built our lives around was a lie? Of course we can have lunch with Sophia's family, I said, forcing a smile. That sounds wonderful. Lunch was a welcome distraction. Sophia's parents were warm and gracious, and watching Emma chatter happily in a mixture of English, Spanish, and enthusiastic gestures helped ground me in the present moment. This was why we had come to Barcelona, to give Emma new experiences, to help her grow and learn and discover the world beyond our small life in Portland. But throughout the meal, I found myself studying Emma's face, looking for traces of Daniel in her expressions. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the way she gestured with her hands when she got excited, they were all him. How could I keep her from knowing her father when so much of who she was came from him? After lunch, we visited the Sagrada Familia, Gaudi's masterpiece that had been Daniel's dream destination. Emma was awestruck by the towering spires and intricate facades, her sketchbook out immediately as she tried to capture the impossible details. It's like a fairy tale castle, she breathed, craning her neck to look up at the towers, but even more beautiful. As we explored the cathedral, I found myself wondering what Daniel would think of seeing his daughter here, in this place he had always wanted to visit. Would he be proud of how curious and thoughtful she had become? Would he recognize himself in her artistic nature, her fearless approach to new experiences? That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, I sat on our balcony with a glass of wine and tried to figure out what to do. I had Daniel's phone number now. He had given it to me before I left his hotel room. I could call him, arrange for him to see Emma. But how? What would I tell her? The truth seemed impossible, too complex, too painful for a 7-year-old to understand. But I had learned over the past 4 years that children were often more resilient than adults gave them credit for. Emma had survived her father's death, maybe she could survive his resurrection too. I picked up my phone and dialed before I could change my mind. Charlotte. Daniel's voice was hopeful, desperate. Tomorrow, I said without preamble. 2:00. Park Güell, near the main entrance. You can see her, but I'm going to tell her the truth. All of it in terms she can understand. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. This doesn't mean anything beyond tomorrow, I said firmly. This doesn't mean forgiveness, and it doesn't mean you get to waltz back into our lives like nothing happened. This is just what Emma deserves. The chance to know her father is alive. I understand. Do you? Because if you hurt her, Daniel, if you make promises you can't keep or disappear again, I will make sure she forgets you ever existed. Do you understand that? Yes. I understand. I hung up before he could say anything else, my hands shaking as I set the phone aside. Tomorrow, I would shatter Emma's understanding of the world and rebuild it with a truth that was far more complicated than the simple tragedy she had known. I just hoped I was strong enough to help her through it. The next morning, I woke up with a stomach full of knots and a head full of doubts. How do you tell a 7-year-old that everything she believes about her father's death is a lie? How do you explain adult concepts like money laundering and witness protection to a child who still believes in fairy tales? Over breakfast, I tried to gauge Emma's mood, to see if she was in the right emotional space for such a monumental conversation. She seemed happy and relaxed, excited about another day of exploring Barcelona. Can we go back to Park Güell today? She asked, spreading jam on her toast. I want to finish my drawing of the mosaic dragon. Actually, I was hoping we could go there this afternoon, I said carefully. There's something I need to talk to you about first, sweetheart. Something important. Emma looked up from her breakfast, immediately alert to the serious tone in my voice. Are we in trouble? No, baby. We're not in trouble. But I need to tell you something that might be confusing, and I want you to know that whatever happens, I love you very much, and everything is going to be okay. Her eyes went wide. Is someone sick? Are you sick? No one is sick, I assured her quickly. It's about your daddy. Emma set down her toast, her full attention on me now. Daddy? I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. You know how we've always believed that Daddy died in an accident when you were little? She nodded solemnly. Well, it turns out that he didn't die. He's been alive this whole time, but he had to go away to keep us safe. He couldn't tell us where he was going because there were some bad people who might have hurt us if they knew where to find him. Emma stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. Daddy's alive? Yes. He's not in heaven? No, sweetheart. He's not in heaven. Where is he? I swallowed hard. He's here. In Barcelona. And if you want to see him, he would like to see you too. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Emma's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, hope, hurt, anger, cycling through emotions that seemed too complex for someone so young. He's been alive this whole time? She asked finally. Yes. And he never came to see me? This was the question I had been dreading. He wanted to, baby. But he was afraid that the bad people might hurt us if he came back. He thought we would be safer if he stayed away. But the bad people are gone now? Yes. They can't hurt us anymore. Emma was quiet for another long moment, and I could practically see her mind working through the implications. Does this mean he doesn't have to go away again? I don't know, I said honestly. That's something we'll have to figure out together. Can I see him today? Yes. If you want to. She nodded firmly. I want to see him. The walk to Park Güell felt both too long and too short. Emma was unusually quiet, holding my hand tightly as we made our way through Barcelona's winding streets. I kept checking my watch, my stomach churning with anxiety about what the next few hours would bring. We arrived at the park a few minutes before 2:00, and I scanned the crowds for Daniel. I spotted him near the entrance, looking almost as nervous as I felt. He was wearing a simple blue shirt and jeans, and he had a small wrapped package in his hands. "Is that him?" Emma whispered, following my gaze. "Yes," I said. "That's your daddy." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Emma let go of my hand and walked slowly toward Daniel, her steps careful and deliberate. I followed a few paces behind, my heart in my throat. Daniel saw her coming and knelt down to her level, his face lighting up with wonder and joy. "Emma," he said softly. "My beautiful girl. You're so big." Emma stopped a few feet away from him, studying his face with the same intense concentration she used when working on her art projects. "You look different than I remember." "I'm older," he said. "You are too. You were just 3 the last time I saw you. Mom says you had to go away to protect us from bad people." "That's right. I'm so sorry I couldn't come back sooner." Emma tilted her head, considering this. "Are you really my daddy?" "I really am." "Prove it." Daniel smiled, and I could see tears starting in his eyes. "When you were 2, you had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hopscotch that you carried everywhere. You wouldn't go to sleep without him, and one time we couldn't find him and you cried for 2 hours until we discovered him in the washing machine." Emma's eyes widened. "I still have Mr. Hopscotch. And when you were 3, right before I had to go away, you drew me a picture of our family. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a purple door. I kept that picture with me every single day." Emma stepped closer. "You did?" "I did. I missed you every single day, Emma. I thought about you every morning when I woke up and every night before I went to sleep." "Then why didn't you come back?" The simple question held so much pain, so much longing. Daniel looked up at me briefly, then back at Emma. "Because I was scared. I was scared that you might not remember me, or that you might be angry with me for going away. I was scared that I had been gone so long that you didn't need me anymore." Emma considered this seriously. "I was angry," she said finally. "But I missed you more than I was angry. I missed you too, more than anything in the world." Emma stepped forward then and wrapped her arms around his neck. Daniel held her like she was made of the most precious, fragile thing in the universe, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood there watching my daughter reunite with her father, feeling a complex mixture of joy and heartbreak. This was what she had needed, what she had been missing all these years. But it was also a reminder of everything that had been stolen from us, all the moments and milestones and ordinary days that we could never get back. "I brought you something," Daniel said when they finally separated. He handed Emma the wrapped package. She opened it carefully to reveal a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook with her name embossed on the cover in gold letters. "It's for your art," he said. I heard that you like to draw." Emma beamed. "I love to draw. I've been drawing all the buildings here in Barcelona. Wanna see?" For the next hour, we sat on a bench in the park while Emma showed Daniel her drawings and told him about her life. She talked about school and her friends, about the soccer team she had joined, about the books she loved to read. Daniel listened to every word like it was the most fascinating thing he had ever heard, asking questions and making appropriate responses. Watching them together, I could see the connection reforming, the bond between father and daughter that 4 years of separation couldn't completely break. Emma was cautious but curious, testing the waters of this relationship she had thought was lost forever. "Can you come see where we're staying?" Emma asked as the afternoon wore on. Daniel looked at me questioningly. I hesitated. Letting him into our hotel room felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. But Emma was looking at me with such hope in her eyes that I couldn't say no. "For a little while," I said finally. As we walked back through the city, Emma chattered happily between us, pointing out landmarks and asking Daniel if he liked Barcelona. He told her about some of his favorite places in the city, promising to show them to her if she wanted to see them. "Are you going to come home with us?" Emma asked suddenly as we reached our hotel. Daniel and I exchanged glances. This was the question I had been dreading, the one I didn't have an answer for. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," Daniel said carefully. "That's something your mom and I need to talk about." Emma nodded, seeming to accept this answer. But you're not going to disappear again, right? You're not going to go back to being dead? No, Daniel said firmly. I'm not going to disappear again. Whatever happens, you'll always know where I am and how to reach me. I promise. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, Daniel and I sat on the hotel balcony talking quietly. The conversation was painful and necessary, full of accusations and explanations and the slow, difficult work of trying to figure out what came next. I know I don't have the right to ask, Daniel said as the night grew late, but I want to be part of her life. I want to be her father again. You never stopped being her father, I said quietly. But being a parent isn't just about biology, Daniel. It's about being there day after day through tantrums and homework and scraped knees and bad dreams. It's about showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I know that. And I know I can't make up for the time I lost. But I can be here now. I can show up now. I studied his face in the dim light from the hotel room. What does that look like? Do you want us to move to Barcelona? Do you want to move back to Portland? Do you want some kind of custody arrangement? I want whatever is best for Emma, he said. And for you. Don't, I said sharply. Don't make this about me. You lost the right to make decisions about what's best for me 4 years ago. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right. But Emma, I want to be the father she deserves. However that works, wherever that needs to happen. Looking at him now, I could see the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. But I could also see the man who had made a series of devastating choices that had torn our family apart. The question was whether those two men could coexist, whether he could be the father Emma needed while still being someone I could trust. We'll figure it out, I said finally. One day at a time. But Daniel? Yes? If you ever lie to her again, if you ever make a promise you can't keep, if you ever put your fear or your guilt ahead of her needs, I will cut you out of our lives permanently. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Because she's been through enough. We both have. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that our trip to Barcelona had become something entirely different than what I had planned. I had come here hoping to help Emma and myself move forward from Daniel's death. Instead, we were now faced with the much more complicated task of figuring out how to move forward with his life. The future was uncertain, full of difficult conversations and painful adjustments. But for the first time in 4 years, Emma would go to sleep knowing that her father was alive, that he loved her, and that he wasn't going anywhere. Whatever challenges lay ahead, that knowledge would be worth everything. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our house in Portland, watching through the window as Daniel pushed Emma on the swing set he had installed in our backyard. Her laughter carried through the glass, bright and joyful in a way that reminded me of how she used to sound before grief taught her to be careful with her happiness. The path back to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. There had been family counseling sessions, difficult conversations with lawyers, and more than a few nights when I wondered if I was making the right choices. Daniel had moved back to Portland but into his own apartment, earning back our trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. He picked Emma up from school 2 days a week and had her for dinner every Sunday. He attended every soccer game, every school concert, every parent-teacher conference. He was slowly, carefully, becoming the father she had always needed him to be. Our relationship, his and mine, was still complicated, still fragile. We weren't married anymore, that chapter of our lives having ended the day he chose to disappear rather than fight for our family. But we were partners now in the most important job either of us would ever have, raising Emma. "Mom," Emma called from the backyard. "Come swing with us." I stepped outside into the warm spring afternoon, accepting the challenge. As I settled into the swing beside my daughter, I caught Daniel's eye and saw something there that I recognized: gratitude, hope, and the determination of a man who had learned the true cost of the choices he makes. We were not the family we had been 4 years ago. We were something new, something rebuilt from the wreckage of lies and loss. But as Emma's laughter filled the air around us, I knew we were exactly the family she needed us to be. Sometimes the best endings are really beginnings in disguise.